What's going on? My name is Psyche, and welcome to part 2 of the Dead Cells 2.6 weapon showcases. Today we have the Penitent to thank for this run, because today I'm going to be showcasing the Face Flask. Originally, I was very skeptical about this item. I mean, an item that takes away your health is kind of similar to one that we already have in the game, Vampirism. And, well, Vampirism kind of sucks, so I was really debating whether or not this was actually going to work. After some testing as well as some suggestions that I saw on the official Dead Cells Discord server, I decided to pair this with the Spite Sword. Now, surprisingly, this build is probably one of the most overpowered ones I've ever experienced. And today I'm going to prove to you guys why the Face Flask is one of Motion Twin's best design items to this date ever since they designed the Snake Fangs, which is one of my personal favorites. We're just gonna breeze through the prisoners' quarters and go straight into the toxic sewers. Because this is a strong build, I'm just gonna go straight for the route that gives me the most scroll fragments. Now, contrary to what you might think, the Face Flask does not reset your kill streak, which is one of its strongest points. And on top of that, the health that it takes away is not significant at all, which means you're not at a risk as opposed to Vampirism, where it literally takes out all of your health. And thirdly, it recharges extremely fast, so if you have the correct mutations, in this case I'm using Killer Instinct, but in a second I'll also pick up Instinct of the Master of Arms, you can potentially get the Face Flask to having essentially zero cooldown, which means that you can use it constantly. Now you might ask, why would you want to use this constantly? I mean, all it does is takes away your health, and maybe you can gain a little bit back. However, because the description of the Spite Sword reads that it deals critical damage right after you take damage, you're essentially in this process of using Face Flask, doing critical damage with the Spite Sword, getting that cooldown down to 0, and then using it again. Now, for those that don't know, I actually showcased the Spite Sword as my second showcase run of all time on this channel. I believe the first one was the Katana. And I gotta say, the Spite Sword has got to be one of the strongest weapons in the game. The reason for this is that the amount of damage that it does for a brutality weapon is absolutely huge. Even if you don't pull off crits, the damage is still pretty decent. Because how this item used to be played is that people would just run a shield, and then they will purposely block, not parry an attack to take some damage, which would trigger the critical hits for the Spite Sword. Now, because Face Flask is now in the game, there's no need to take damage yourself. Now there is actually a way for you to take damage without resetting your kill streak, which is absolutely huge. We're going to go into the Crypt prison. Now, because Spite Sword deals critical damage all the time if you are cursed, it's basically free damage by this point. Now, I was a little bit skeptical because I didn't know whether or not Face Flask would kill you if you used it while cursed. So we're just gonna find out here in a second. Now, there's really no reason for me to use it here anyways, but I think my finger just kinda slipped and I just accidentally used the Face Flask. But in a second here, I'm just gonna use it, and it does not kill you when you are cursed. I mean, in this case it doesn't really matter because you're running Spite Sword, but if you're running any other weapon and you're trying to do some extra damage from Face Flask, then this can be extremely beneficial. So yeah, I'm just letting you guys know, you don't actually die from the curse if you use Face Flask. Now, that being said, this alone doesn't make the Face Flask all that viable. However, one mutation changes everything, and that is Vengeance. Now, Vengeance historically has been a fairly weak mutation. It's been pretty situational. It reads that after you take damage, you have a damage reduction for a brief moment and you do increased damage. Now, with the Face Flask, you can actually just proc Vengeance all the time. So that means every time you press the left trigger, you essentially just get free damage, and you get that damage all of the time, which is pretty overpowered. Now, I have yet to showcase any of the other weapons in this update so far, so until I do, I can't really compare it to anything else. But just for the moment, I'm gonna say the Face Flask is a fantastic item. We're just gonna go into the ancient sewers, and we're going to obliterate everything. In fact, in a moment here, you'll actually see me one-shot those disgusting worms with the Spite Sword, which is kind of ridiculous, just like here. And yeah, just from the consensus of players, imagine that Face Flask will single-handedly increase the power level of all brutality builds. since now that a seemingly useless mutation before, Vengeance, is now gonna be used all of the time. Now as for Blasphemous, I have not played it, I just know that it's pretty mature in terms of themes and the graphics. However, the art style does look really nice. I'm not sure if I'll ever play it because of school, but maybe if I had some free time and some spare money, I might be able to play it on a stream. Also, I should say that today I have just received my brand new mic, and this will actually allow me to start streaming, so I'm pretty excited to do that. I'm not sure how often I'm gonna do it for, I do have school assignments, but maybe in December I'll probably stream a couple times, maybe I'll do some live item showcases. So anyways, heading into the Conjunctivius fight now, so let's see just how much damage this build is capable of. Just like that, we're entering the tentacle phase. And I don't know what it is about this build that it seems to have more scroll stats than usual. Because the build in which I showcased the Spite Sword the first time, which I believe was all the way back in like January or February of this year, I had 37 stats in brutality in the endgame. Now, to this day, that is still the highest I've ever gotten. All throughout 2021, I have never managed to beat that record. The closest I've ever gotten was 36. I'm not sure how this run will fare in terms of the scroll count. I don't quite remember what I got, but I seem to have gotten an increased amount of scroll stats. So maybe this is the reason why you guys should run the Spite Sword. Anyways, there is the 2 tentacle phases done already, and we're just gonna land some hits, and just like that, Conjunctivius is down. Now, like I said, it doesn't even ruin your kill streak, so you can still get the no-hit doors for the bosses, which is absolutely amazing. Anyways, we're gonna go into the Slumbering Sanctuary because I'm feeling really confident about this build, and I wanted to see its actual potential. I mean, those golems are kind of a pain, and I wanted to see if this build can actually handle them effectively. So yeah, haven't been here in a while, a lot of medium-sized enemies, and honestly, if I were to change this biome, I would just add like additional scroll fragments, maybe like a entire scroll stat altogether. I know that in the Slumbering Sanctuary, you only get 1 extra scroll fragment compared to the other levels such as Graveyard, so I honestly think this isn't enough to motivate people to come here. And on top of that, because there's a lot of backtracking going on, since you only have a couple teleporters here and there anyways, you have to backtrack a lot, which means that you'll accumulate a lot of melees. And given that this biome was designed before the melees change of 2.1, this is kind of like an unintentional side effect of it. This is essentially the same deal with Astrolab, except Astrolab is just kind of bad in general. So I think a great motivator for people to actually come here is to actually just give 1 additional scroll stat, which sounds kind of ridiculous if you think about it, but honestly, I really like the design of the Slumbering Sanctuary. I think concept of the Switch as well as the soundtrack is just really nice. So by this point, as you can see, I'm basically just one-shotting or two-shotting the elites, which is kind of ridiculous. Now, I'm going to get the curse chest. This curse is going to be somewhat difficult to lift, simply because it's Slumbering Sanctuary. I'm just gonna fast forward this bit, nothing really is going on here. I'm pretty much just gonna one-shot everything here. Those demons you really gotta watch out for because they can actually do some really unexpected moves, especially with the fire blasts. And in the Flawless boss door, I did actually manage to find a legendary flamethrower. I don't usually use legendary items, but if you find one and it's actually good, then you might as well do it. In fact, some people actually just give up on their current build and just use whatever legendary item they got. Because since legendary items are just so broken in terms of damage scaling, you're pretty much guaranteed to have like a version of the same item but on steroids. So we're gonna jump into a cluster of enemies here, but they're just gonna get melted like butter. This build is just too good. Like, I would go as far as to say this build is actually better than Seda Stiletto. Obviously, it's not a requirement that you use Face Flask with the Spite Sword, but people theorized that it would actually work, and to my surprise, it did. This build is really one of its kind, and honestly, this update so far has kind of reinvigorated my enjoyment of the game. So many of these items are just really well designed. Even if they're not all overpowered, the concept is so fresh that it just feels really nice to play. So we're gonna go into the caverns because I do intend on skipping High Peak Castle. I mean, who goes there these days? Also, I should mention that if you use the Face Flask while your health is already low, it will actually turn more of your health into rally points. So I believe in the tooltip it says that it converts 25% of your missing health to rally points. Essentially, again, just like a less extreme version of the Vampirism skill, but honestly, this was all it needed for Vampirism to be competitive. Anyways, in the shop, I decided to swap out a shield for something that does even more damage, because I know some of you have said that I always run shields in my runs, so today I thought might as well switch it up. Because I'm doing so much damage already, let's just add more damage on top of that. So I know Throwing Knife historically is not the most hardest hitting support weapon in the game, but you know, ever since they removed dual binding, I thought I might as well give it a try. And really, Throwing Knife has nothing to do with the build. I mean, it doesn't really synergize with anything in particular. It is one of the first items that's unlocked from the beginning of the game, and as a support weapon, I would still say it's decent. It's not like bad or anything. At this point, I'm really not too worried about the rest of the build anymore. I think this build really has what it takes to be one of the best. And this is what I really like about Face Flask, at least this type of items that are introduced to the game. I really enjoy items that don't really work too well by itself, but it really enables the potential of some of the weapons that already exist in the game. In this case, this will be Spite Sword. The Face Flask really unlocks the potential of this weapon. So we're just gonna go into the giant fight. For a brief moment, I actually forgot I don't have a shield anymore because I'm so used to having a shield in my second slot that I was just going to parry those projectiles, but then I forgot I don't have one. So I'm pretty sure I just jumped up at the exact last moment and I did manage to dodge it. So I don't remember whether or not I had a no-hit fight, but I guess we'll just have to see. So dodging those fists, they feel really different. And I tried to throw the flamethrower onto the fist, that didn't work out. Anyways, didn't really matter in the end because I did get the no-hit. So we're just gonna go into the throne room. Honestly, at this point, I probably would have gone into Distillery or High Peak Castle just to, you know, flex on the enemies a little bit more. Because I do think this build is just really powerful. I don't think I was really in any danger if I did that. We're fighting Hand of the King without a shield. I know, this is really something new. By this point, I usually swap out something in my secondary slot for a shield because I just think it's so much better to have a shield in the final two fights of the game. Primarily this one and the 5 BC boss. But, you know, Hand of the King is not giant and you can't really melt through him the same way you can with the giant. But he's gonna summon the enemies, we're just gonna one-shot those elites. Entering his second phase, just get the Face Flask. The only real problem is when you can't land hits onto him, that you don't get the cooldown on the Face Flask. But fortunately, I was able to get the no-hit. Well, technically it's not really a no-hit since I did take damage from Face Flask, but since the game considers that it is a no-hit, I have no problems whatsoever. So we're gonna continue on to the Astrolab now. Now at times I do feel like the game is sometimes just like a DPS check, but if you have the strongest builds in the game, it's really not too big of an issue anymore, especially in biomes. Because this build does so much damage, you're essentially just one-shotting every single monster. And when it comes to builds that are not so great, you really have to watch out for your loadout composition, because in that case it really matters which items that you use in your runs. But as far as I know, there's really no way for the game to scale up the health and damage for enemies. They deal so much damage on 5 BC already that there's really no point of making them even harder. I mean, you do have the elites, but since this build is so overpowered, it kinda just plows through them anyways, and it does not really matter anymore. Instead of one-shotting enemies, you're two-shotting them instead. I know, what a pain, right? When I showcase all of the weapons from 2.6, I do actually intend to doing a tier list on this version of the game. Well, actually just the 6 items that were added in this update. But from what I'm looking at, the Face Flask is looking really good right now. Honestly, from first glance, it may not seem like much, but the Face Flask will change everything about brutality builds. At least that's what I predict. In fact, I can even imagine that they might change something about it in the future, because from this point, I can honestly see some people running Face Flask all the time. It's kind of like gastronomy in the old updates, where it doubled the value of all healing items. This is kind of similar, but for damage and brutality builds. In fact, if I saw the Face Flask in any other color, I might just still take it. It's just still really good. So we're gonna climb up this tower area. Like I said, not really an issue anymore. As for the elites, just one-shotting and two-shotting them. We're gonna go up to the Observatory. I'm gonna briefly show off my build. I believe I did have some nice affixes, but it could have been better. The primary reason that I chose Throwing Knife is that I wanted to apply one more status effect on top of burning from the flamethrower. In this case, it's gonna be bleeding. And when you have more affixes, it's gonna become easier to synergize your weapons. So heading into the collector fight, in this case I only had 31 stats, and right off the bat I did manage to lose the no-hit, so kind of unfortunate, but as you can see, when you're low on health, you can actually get in a lot of free health just from the Face Flask. So one thing that I've always hated about Brutality is that the lack of health has really prevented me from playing it for the longest time. I know with tactics you deal so much damage that health doesn't really matter, and in survival you do have shields, you do have ice armor, crusher, that kind of stuff. So many defensive options that again you can kind of mitigate the health that you lose. But in Brutality, because it's a melee focused kind of archetype, you're actually pretty likely to take damage. And when that happens, there's no easy way for you to heal back up. You do have like Frenzy, and there's also Adrenaline that you can use, but those aren't that reliable as far as I can tell. The Face Flask is probably the first ever way for you to reliably heal back up as a Brutality player. So yeah, breezing through this fight by this point, unfortunately did lose the no-hit, but we are at the final stretch of the game. It doesn't really matter at this point. We're just gonna get him to drop the Panacea and drink it from there. Because I do so much damage with the flamethrower, it's just carrying the run. There we go, not even an issue, collector is down. So yeah, Face Flask. From today's showcase, that was a very impressive performance. I do recommend you guys from trying it out too. I know it may not seem like a very impactful skill at first, but when you play with it a little bit, it will change the way you think about Brutality. Anyways, thank you all for tuning in to this week's weapon showcase. Stay tuned for next time, and I'll see you later.